I think we'll get started. We've got 50 people in the room so far. That's a lot of people. That's brilliant. And there are more people, I'm sure, that will come along. But welcome to this session of exchanging notes. This session is based around industry pathways, as you all know, which is quite a hot topic at the moment. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. So thanks so much for signing up. It's so great to see so many of you here. Loads of people that I know and a lot of people that I don't. So it's just really good to see such a diverse room here. Let's have a look. So today, you're going to get an exclusive preview of the findings of the consultation that is Industry Connect. It's all based around pathways into industry. We have two of our consultants, Dan Sue and Kate McBain, who are on the call and will be presenting to us. And also we have Carol, our director, programs director, and Daniel, who is our engagement director as well. So just to note that this is an inclusive space. Feel free to kind of note down any questions that you have. The chat will be open for you to put down any questions, which I'll be firing out in the Q&A, but also I'll be opening up the room so that you can ask those questions as well. So please feel free to do that if you want to. All right. As Phoebe said, closed captions is on, the function's on. This is an inclusive space. So if there's any tech support that's needed, let us know. Phoebes is on the call. She's dapper at that. So, just let us know. All right. There will be a Q&A at the end where you'll have an opportunity to ask some questions. All right. But hopefully you'll enjoy this session. I'm pretty excited about this. We've been doing this consultation, has been put together since last October. So now is the time that we're going to shout about it. And you guys are the first to hear about the findings of this consultation. So you're very, very lucky people before it gets published in a couple of weeks. All right. So I'm going to hand over to Dan, Sue and Kate, who are going to give us our amazing presentation. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Nice to see you all. Thank you for joining us. And thank you, Mish, for the lovely handover. Just to reinforce, we're incredibly excited to share this with you. This has been almost a year in the making. We've met and visited quite a few of you. Some of you may be new faces. All of you equally welcome, because we're incredibly excited to share the findings of this consultation. I'm just going to share my screen and welcome you formally to the findings of exchanging notes to the findings of the Industry Connect consultation. My name is Dan Sue. I am an educator, a facilitator, a creative director. Some of you may know me. For others who don't, I am a venue manager at Glastonbury Festival. I run the Rum Shack. I'm founder of an education organisation called Lyrix Organix. I've worked at the Roundhouse, amongst many other places, as a senior program manager for freelance and entrepreneurship. I'm on the UK Council at Creative UK, and just about the place working with young people. Who are you, Kate?
Hello. Thank you very much for having me. I'm Kate McBain. I'm a researcher and educator. I currently run the events and music business courses at BIMM London. I've been in higher education for a long time, but I'm also a strategic producer and a producer of both kind of music events, as well as working across the arts, especially in creative learning. And my research specifically, actually, this is a nice circle thing, because I started out as a researcher looking at key skills and training needs in the music industry over 25 years ago. So it's really exciting to be here. And yeah, that's me. Thanks, Dan. Frozen. Interesting. Okay. So yeah, Dan and I are here to is Dan back? Dan is back.
Yes, thankfully. Sorry about that. I had a moment in the ether of the internet. I was wondering whether I was going to be propelled back, so I'm glad to be here. Thank you for filling for me, Kate. So just to let you know what's going to be happening today. Oh, sorry, bear with me, my computer's just catching up. Sorry, 1 second. Come on, computer. Okay, session plan, here we go. So you'll have us for about the next 50+ minutes. Just as a very quick once over, we'll be looking at a background and context to the research, looking a little bit at the terrain at which you all live and traverse. There'll be a couple of activities real quick, and then we'll be talking ultimately about the gaps and opportunities in the sector for you and for all of us. And then I'll be handing over to Youth Music to talk about their recommendations. And then there'll be some time at the end for some questions and some answers. A quick caveat, which is there's a huge in-depth report which speaks to all of this. So if some of this feels like we're going through it quite quickly, do forgive us. We've got a limited amount of time, a lot to get through. And also, as I'll reinforce later, you know, this has been a massive undertaking. We've been all around doing this nationwide consultation, but obviously we haven't been able to speak to every single person. So just to kind of acknowledge that this is still an ongoing conversation, but hopefully a lot of this will resonate with all of you. And I just kind of wanted to frame this by mentioning one of the quotes from for our preceding blueprint for the future report, which was published by Youth Music in 2020, which said that thousands of young people are currently being driven out of the sector they love or forced to go it alone outside of the system. Now, a lot of what we're going to be talking about is about the experience that your young people have getting through this incredibly difficult sector, potentially to reach the music industry, or as we'll start to unpack a little bit, the music industries in its broadest sense. So hold on to that thought. I'm just going to do a quick little activity just to warm us up. Now, what I have here, and bear with me, this may sound a little bit silly, is an egg, right? And with this egg, I'm going to throw this, not literally, figuratively, because it will make a right mess on my screen. I'm going to throw this egg to another screen that I can see. So I'll call out your name and I'll throw an egg. Now, for a moment, I just want you to look around your room, around your desk, and find something that you might be able to throw imaginatively to another screen. Don't show it to us, just kind of keep it off screen. It could be a Lego person, it could be a stapler, it doesn't really matter. Just find something around you that you might be able to throw to another screen. I'll just give you about 10 seconds to find something. And ultimately, we are in vast, very different locations. And that's a beautiful thing. The expertise is spread across this country. Now, these countries rather. And I wanted to recognize that by throwing this egg to someone. So just as an example, I'm going to throw this and say the name Kate. I'm going to throw this to you. You catch it and you throw whatever you have to, what have you got there?
It's an egg shaker. Look at that.
Oh, nice.
Okay. Okay.
So Kate, if you call out a name that you can see and throw it to that screen.
Michelle.
How did I know you was going to do that? I had to pick up something very quickly. Highlighter. I'm going to throw this to Asia.
I weirdly only have calculator, so it's a calculator. Don't know what that says about what I'm doing all day. Cool. I'm going to throw it to Rick.
Yeah, it's changed into a cowboy boot or cowgirl boot.
Nice.
I'm going to pass it on to Wisdom.
Yeah.
I have a CD. I can't believe I actually have a CD in my bag. I probably haven't had a CD in absolutely ages. I'm actually at the Barbican at another event, so it's hiding in a corner. So I'm going to throw this to Karen.
Was that me?
Yeah.
Yeah, the sound quality doesn't go so good. All I've got is baby wipes here. So I'm going to throw the baby wipes to Kimberly.
Hi, I've got a remote control this end. I'm just looking at a name that I'm going to throw this to Frankie.
I'm going to make this the last one. Frankie, you do one more throw. What have you got there?
I've got some sellotape.
Amazing.
And I'll throw it to Phoebe.
And Phoebe, what have you eventually turned our egg into?
Oh my gosh, I have got a fun fidget spinner.
Nice. Very good. Thank you, everyone, for indulging me in that silly little game, just to switch things up a little bit and keep it lighthearted. But there is a kind of a purpose to this, because actually, when we're thinking about kind of an activity to start up, I was thinking about doing something similar to this, but as a relay. But actually, if you think about the work that we do, right, we're all working in different places, different programs, doing incredible work. Like, I have so much admiration for all of you. But, you know, a young person, a young creative may be going to one of our projects and then move into another one of these projects on the screen, and then perhaps another one. And actually, this egg is a little bit like the journey of a young person through the music sector. That is, they're traveling from location to location. We may not know what location they're traveling to, but we know that they are gradually progressing. And sometimes they may be moving sideways. Sometimes they may move backwards to move forwards. But ultimately, each time they're moving to a screen, moving to a program, they are picking up new things. And that new thing kind of evolves them through their career pathways. And many of you, indeed, may have been working with some of the same young creatives that I might have been. And there's something really beautiful about that, but at the same time, quite disconnected. In the same way, it's beautiful that we're connected here on Zoom, but also we're slightly disconnected. So I guess I just wanted to acknowledge that and recognize that there isn't really a linear journey for a young person moving through our sector, or at least this is at least how many people perceive it to be. Okay, so hold on to that thought as we move through the next few slides as a bit of context. So the wider context of the research that we've been doing, again, just to highlight something from the Youth Music Blueprint report, our industries are so lacking in diversity, and the many ways in which the professional talent development pipeline is not fit for purpose and urgently needs to evolve. So we've already understood that there are things within the system that could be better improved, and indeed recognize the world that we're in now. And to put a bit of clothing on that, we've kind of identified 4 key areas of this wider context. So number 1, the change in creative industries. It's very obvious that there's changes all around us, from digital innovations to social shifts that are enabling creative practitioners and audiences to move beyond traditional things like genres or wisdom CDs or vertical movement through the industry. Equally, we're seeing shifts in the music education sector, demonstrated not least by the National Plan for Music Education. We are seeing a rapidly changing workforce. So I'm a freelancer. I'm also an entrepreneur. I'm starting to see that many young people are seeing themselves as entrepreneurs. And this is a beautiful, wonderful thing that we haven't quite harnessed yet. And also this changing workforce is kind of, our old legacy assumptions are built into the system. And so what we're starting to see is a shift in higher education towards a greater emphasis on enterprise and entrepreneurship education. And finally, another piece of context is enterprising culture. So what we mean by that is boosting economic growth, encouraging innovation, looking at beyond London, in the kind of traditional stereotype of where, you know, power and finance is kind of located, that we know that's not actually true, or that shouldn't be true. And we need to be able to contribute to building that back up in borrowing some of the kind of ideas that come from the leveling up agenda around jobs and innovation and growth and so on. Now, if we were to kind of hang that on some of the many salient points that came out of our consultations, one thing that we heard is that we need to give young people the space. We need to give them the space to experiment, to try out, to learn, to test, and ask themselves questions about how far that they want to take it. And our role as leaders in the sector, as facilitators on the ground, is to prompt those questions and to guide and steer them. Now, in practical terms, what this meant was, as we were proceeding on this consultation, we had 3 key aims for Industry Connect. Number 1 was to map routes into the music industries. What does it look like now? And using that as a basis to clarify where there are gaps in provision, where things can or should evolve, and ultimately leading to a set of recommendations to and from youth music. I'm going to hand over to Kate now, who will talk a little bit about how we did this and who we spoke to.
Thank you, Dan. Yeah, great to see everybody. Thank you. Just very briefly, in terms of what we did for this consultation, I think it's fair to say that we did quite a bit more than we initially intended, because we were absolutely overwhelmed by the interest from people in the sector who wished to contribute. It's still not, we still didn't talk to as many people as we would like to. I'm sure Dan and I would like to continue those conversations for another year. But in total, we ended up speaking to almost, there was about 300 people. We ran 8 key sessions, or 12 sessions around the country in several different places. And our absolute key focus here, and this is what I think has led to some really exciting findings, is that we really wanted to bring people around the table who were not just from within the music sector, as well as bringing people from across all the different areas of the music industries and ecosystem. So we brought together people from further and higher education, as well as the music hubs, as well as people in youth services and community music organizations, as well as those from venues and industry, commercial industry companies, record labels, and music industry representatives, and those from other sectors. So including creative gaming and theatre and dance. And that, I think, has been really, really key to the kind of findings that have emerged. We also ran a number of youth consultations with those under the age of 25, 30, from a variety of different backgrounds, some who had graduated, some who had not been through the university system, and others who had been through a number of the programs represented by people here. We also added to that 40 interviews, quite in-depth interviews, as well as a really extensive lit review where we looked at the broader context that Dan just introduced. It isn't entirely reflective of the entire UK. We would have liked to have spoken to more people in Scotland and in Wales, and we don't here deal necessarily regional difference in a really in-depth fashion, but it is represented in the report. Yeah, but the focus really is about bringing people together and multiple perspectives together, so that, as our research questions outline, we could get a better sense of what the terrain of work and music actually looks like for young people. And this, of course, includes a variety of different spaces in which young people come to know what music is and what work in music actually is. And then we wanted to understand how people navigated and found their own pathways through that terrain of differing contexts. If you could just click again, please, Dan. And so in mapping the terrain of the music ecosystem and the pathways that young people kind of forge for themselves, or that we help them find, we wanted to understand how and what kind of interventions would better support them in navigating their way through the industry. We were also originally tasked to look at whether there was a need for a formal network to support this kind of stuff, and that is in there. But we started off very much by taking as broad a trans-contextual approach as possible to try and understand how multiple sectors intersect and layer upon each other in young people's experience. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Kate. And so to break down what we found with regards to the terrain, hence my slightly clunky contours. I like an ordnance survey map. But we were trying to make sense of the current provisions. And so how we organized that thinking was kind of splitting it up into 4 key areas. So number 1, formal, further and higher education, including conservatoires.
Conservatoires, I think. Yeah, sorry, thank you. The private or small to medium enterprises, the new kind of private universities, as well as traditional universities, university technical colleges and studio schools. So anything that is formalized. Yeah.
And then the second category was work-based or vocational training programs. So this would also include apprenticeships and access courses. Kate, was anything you wanted to add there?
And internships. There were some really interesting examples of paid internships and also new approaches by industry employers to rethinking their onboarding system, so that actually their onboarding system becomes more like a 9 to 12 month program of support. So that's it. And yeah, and then key to that really is about embedding people in work.
And the third would be, and which we're seeing much more of at the moment, is professional development programs and platforming opportunities. So as an example, when I was working at Roundhouse, you may be familiar with the brand new building that they've opened next door, specifically for freelance and entrepreneurship in the creative industries. But we're also talking about Next Step Grounded Sounds. We're talking about PPL Momentum Accelerator, PRS Foundation's New Music Plus, and the I Love Live Artist Development Program. The list goes on, and I'm sure you're familiar with very many of them. And then the fourth one is business growth. So we're talking about the kind of traditional accelerator, incubator, startup approach, which is really looking at investment into businesses or micro businesses. You may have been familiar recently with the Ray and Nephews program that they were running around the music industry. YouTube have programs. I actually run the Roundhouse Creative Accelerator. There's Creative United's Create Support program, and so on. And actually, one that was particularly interesting was Abbey Road's Red program, which has a heavy amount of investment and a lot of resources, which is really interesting to see, certainly in the context of a lot of the work that we're doing with regards to funding, money, fundraising, and so on.
And just to add, Dan, this is where we started looking abroad quite a lot at examples and models of where this has worked in the creative sectors outside of the UK.
Just to let Kate and the youth music team, I'm just going to skip over the poll questions just for time purposes. So just going to reveal to you what our key findings were. And this was a real light bulb moment for many of us, both in the workshop and behind the scenes as well. And I'll contextualize that with the fact that many of us know is that the UK is one of, if not the leading center for music in all of its diversity in the world. And we have a huge music education sector, of which we are all such a fundamental part of it. And yet the people that we're seeing that are kind of moving to the kind of the top of the pyramid, if you like, through contemporary music or popular music, or indeed any other kind of discipline, actually what we're seeing is something which bears more to kind of exclusivity and scarcity and heightened competition, the bottlenecks and the gatekeepers. Basically, what we uncovered, nothing new, is that the way that we fetishize the music industry as the kind of the gold target is actually a barrier to all of the young people that we work with, because they may not necessarily want to be a #1 selling Stormzy, for example, or Adele. Actually, people just want a career in the music industry, and the way that we're conceiving, or traditionally we've conceived the music industry, kind of neglects that to a certain extent. So to put that into context, over to you, Kate.
Thank you. Yeah, I think what we discovered, and quite early on, and then it was just reiterated, was that the way we talk about the music industry is itself actually quite a barrier to young people, and also to what we're doing to support young people. And this is a crude diagram intentionally, because actually this does tend to be the way that a lot of people, or the way in which we're framing the music industry. And that is with music education, a lot of amazing stuff happening down the bottom, music industry at the top, which people are still banging on the ceiling of to get into. And then this middle bit, which is the pathways, which is the ways that you're going to actually broach that, that ladder, if you like. It's quite often referred to as the pipeline, which kind of suggests that there is this singular pathway. And actually what we found was that there are multiple definitions of the industry, and we explored, you know, how youth music defines it as music industries. A lot of academics do that, but also the concept of the music ecosystem that Sound Diplomacy employs is actually a far more appropriate way to talk about the types of opportunities and destinations that young people might move into. And what we actually did was, through the course of our workshops, was we flipped this 90 degrees and started saying, what would this actually mean if we were to stop looking at the industry as this pyramid with this much, much smaller kind of destination at the top? What would happen if we shifted it 90 degrees? Dan, if we move across, thank you, to actually start talking about music as part of a much, much broader creative sector. Now, of course, we know it's part of a much broader sector, but the way that the industry is talked about in many, many cases keeps it actually quite exclusive, and like the pyramid that we've just shown. If we were to shift things and to acknowledge that actually there are multiple destinations that young people will go into following a music education or having engaged with music, then actually it opens up some of the possibilities that are available to young people. So this conceptual shift was actually quite a significant one, and it allowed us to start having conversations about music, but with other sectors entirely, and to learn from their best practice.
And also, just to add to that as well, the reason this seems like quite a silly little maze is that as the experience of, imagine the experience of one of your young creatives on one of your programs. They might be moving through one program and realize that actually there's a blockage at the end of a particular route, and they've got to retrace their steps and find something else. So for example, they want to become a beatboxer, for example, and they do that for a few months and they realize that actually that's not really the one. And actually what they need is to go to a music college, for example, to get some kind of more formal music skills. And then I've had students who may have dropped out of higher education and then moved to something else because their learning styles doesn't necessarily work in that particular environment. So I guess what we're saying is it's a real kind of individual and a kind of a moving beast for any one person moving through that. And we need to double down and recognize that to honor the kind of the movement of our young creatives.
And I think, sorry, Dan, just to say, I think the implications of this really are not that we stop talking about a single music industry necessarily, or indeed we shift straight over to talking about multiple, but that we just acknowledge the way that we are framing this ecosystem is really, really central to how young people then feel empowered enough or able or ready or inclined to start moving through it.
And so this led us to quite a light bulb moment, if you will, with regards to pathways.
Yep.
Kate, do you want me to do this, or do you want to?
Can I just explain how we got to the pathways then, if that's okay? Sorry.
Go for it.
Just in terms, we started mapping, and actually having the matrix up there would be helpful, Dan. Thank you. We were trying to make sense of and organize the numerous types of initiatives that are actually out there. And we started doing this according to two axes. One, how guided the initiative is, how much support it provides young people, and or at the other end, at the top there, how independent these initiatives enable them to be. And on the other axis is the degree to which they are embedded in industry. So some initiatives, like an apprenticeship, is far more embedded in industry than, for instance, YouTube videos or some of the kind of activities that we have at university or in colleges or at schools, where we expose them to the idea of different careers in industry. From this, sorry, go on, Dan. Yeah.
No, you go for it.
No, I was just going to say that from this, we realized that a lot of these initiatives provide experience to young people, they upskill them, but they don't necessarily embed them or help them move into industry and settle themselves into industry or into work, into a creative career. Dan, the flight paths. Thanks.
Yeah, and so one thing that we realized is actually young people are not necessarily moving up a linear ladder, is that actually they're kind of moving from pathways to flight paths. And what we mean by that is they kind of move into different nests. So imagine one of your young people, they come to your program and it's a music making program. And then the next program they do might be an event production program, for example. And then actually they may go get a box office job at a theatre because they need the money and it's still kind of in the creative industries. If this is familiar to you, you'll start to understand that actually what's happening with young creatives is they're moving from kind of nurturing nest to nurturing nest and picking up skills and evolving as they go. And this kind of recognizes this, I guess, what you call in inverted commas, multi-hyphenate or multidisciplinary approaches to their careers. We know, for example, that a young person might be amazing at making social media content as much as they are music making, and actually they become part and parcel of the same kind of necessity. And so when we shift our thinking from kind of a vertical, a vertical kind of linear ladder, and actually moving it to a more horizontal movement, but also thinking about how they move from nest to nest, our role as facilitators, as youth programs, is arguably to be able to create the conditions for them to move from nest to nest, so that they feel equipped and they have everything they need, rather than necessarily dangling a carrot in front of them to say, this is the direction that you should go. And in practical terms, one thing that we found, sorry, Kate, were you going to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that really this comes down to the idea that the majority of significant number of the programs that we looked at result in what we saw as the proverbial cliff edge, that we set them all up for setting up a business or for developing the skills and knowing where they wanted to go, and then we just kind of leave them to fall off the side of a nest. And the idea of developing pathways through collaboration, through partnership, and just through a different way of thinking is that bit by bit we go out with them on their first flight, they come back to the nest, they then fly to the next nest, and they start moving, and then to the extent that they can then go off and fly on their own and create their own nests. And really that's where the idea of the flight paths comes in terms of what we think is actually needed to support young people in navigating this big complex or workforce development system.
And just as a final practical point, if you look back at that matrix, what we've always assumed, including myself at points, is that we start in the bottom left-hand corner where you'll see exposure and guided. So this is really instructional learning. This is how you do X. This is how you do Y. And then we assume that what we want to do is kind of give them enough instructional learning so that they build their confidence and they build a sense of independence to move into that top right corner, that self-directed, embedded, potentially working freelance, as an example. But interestingly, what we found, especially with young people were really keen to vocalize this, is actually their entry point into music making, for example, maybe from a YouTube video. Let's say that they want to learn how to play the guitar. They're not necessarily going to go to college to learn how to play the guitar. They're going to try it out through a series of kind of YouTube tutorials. So actually what we found is that some, not all young people, and it really does depend on the resources available to them, actually move from top left. So we're talking about starting independently, trying new skills, experimenting, and moving to the bottom right. So where we have industry experience and support. And that was quite a pivotal shift in our thinking about how we are best able to support young creatives. And I'll just kind of reinforce that by one of the young creatives in Manchester, who said that the big thing coming out of conversations with our age group is that we want more empowerment and knowledge on how to do it ourselves. And just having space where we are given that trust is the thing that is most important to them. Now, obviously, this doesn't represent everybody, but this represents a voice that is perhaps not as often heard. So to move on to our overall takeaways before we identify the gaps, we kind of identified 4 things. One is to move beyond single predetermined pathways. The second is to locate the music industry, not as this insular sector out on its own, but as part of a much wider creative industries. So for example, if I am a music maker, actually I can learn the skills to become a sound engineer, and that could actually take me into the theatre sector, for example. It could take me into film. It could take me into any numbers across the workforce development system, which is what we're calling it, the workforce development system. The third is that reframing on offstage, not just doubling down on artist development, which is often the kind of the rhetoric of the music industry, is that recognizing that there are a huge amount of jobs across the music industry sector, including many of the jobs that you may already be doing, including being facilitators, tutors, mentors. And that is just as much a valid job as that DIY kind of artist. And then finally, acknowledging micro businesses and the networked economy. And what we mean by that is that it's very clear that, especially in today's day and age is that we're seeing that young creatives, with the challenges that they're facing within the systemic music industry, are starting to own collectives, are starting to own micro businesses, are much more entrepreneurial perhaps than we ever were. And this speaks to the kind of the regional and to some extent the hidden economy, the importance of partnerships, and ultimately the importance of us fostering and building a culture of teaching, of learning, of paying it forward, which we are as kind of youth sector workers already doing. But imagine if we could enable and empower young people to recognize that as well, how this industry could grow. And this also speaks to the growing importance of a socially engaged sector, which of course we are all involved in, but we're also seeing more prominently. So that leads us to think about gaps, opportunities, and recommendations. Now, very quickly, our research and data supports the need to build these cultures of teaching and learning, embed social and inclusive practice into new models, targeted job creations and skill supply in order to acknowledge where the work actually is. So we're not setting our young people up to fail and not get the work that they deserve. So very quickly, to move on to the opportunities, Kate.
Yeah, I'm wondering, this will all be in the report anyway, but we've identified a number of gaps that primarily revolve around the need for us to just think about the ecosystem in a different way. And that includes bringing together both further and higher education to the table. It was exciting at our workshops that we had higher education sitting around the same table as music hubs, for instance, as well as industry employers. And we need to start having those conversations with all kind of stakeholders. Adding to that, the importance of upskilling teaching staff and those at school and in education providers, so that they better understand the opportunities that are available, especially offstage, for young people. And then on top of that, really the entire report, so on the next slide, Dan, talks to the need to reframe how we talk about the sector, how we talk about teaching, for instance. It's not just a case of it's not just a case of employing new teachers, but actually just reframing what it means to be a teacher and revaluing it, which is definitely something that came out of the research and I think a key barrier within the sector. And, ultimately to provide more support for young people to move sideways if they wish to pursue a career as a performer, but also be doing other things, and to appreciate the value of that, as well as then supporting employers to provide more opportunities for work-based learning. Ultimately, it's all about coming together and seeking ways that we can kind of collaborate, share the good practice. And that was a whistle stop. It's in very, very great depth in the report.
Thank you, Kate. So now I'm going to take the opportunity to thank you for listening. I hope some of that landed and resonated with some of the work that you're doing. I certainly know, as a person on the ground and also working on strategy as well, it brought to light a lot of things and kind of, made me realize a lot of things about my practice. And hopefully we can collaboratively make a better place for all the work that we're doing. So I'm going to hand over to Daniel from Youth Music to talk about Youth Music's recommendations.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dan. I am just going to share my screen. Bear with me a second. Has that come up for everyone?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you to Kate and Dan for that whistle-stop tour. Really amazing to hear the findings, and we're really energized and excited at Youth Music about this. Some of the conceptual shifts really helping us in terms of like how we shape our support, and the conversations therefore that we can now start to have with policymakers, and how we can shape our future funding programs and our support for young creatives. So we just wanted to share a few of the recommendations that you'll be able to look at in more detail when we circulate the PDF of this. But we've published a series of 4 recommendations, and as I said, that's going to shape our activities over the coming years. And I think, first and foremost, as sort of almost like an umbrella recommendation here, right at the top of this, is that we're looking at how we can have a better join up through a national music strategy. And we're not the only people calling for this, but We know there's a series of current strategies that have come out. We've got the National Plan for Music Education, Cultural Education Plan, all of these documents. And then we've got these government departments, DFE, DCMS, and we've got the industry itself, which is represented in different ways by different trade bodies and membership associations. What we've recognized here is that there are unintendedly a series of silos that people are operating in. And what we're seeing as the effects of this is it is creating and exacerbating these barriers for young creatives to enter and progress in the music and creative industries, especially those from more underrepresented backgrounds. We know there's some opportunities coming up with the new government. There's a new body being created called Skills England, which is one in a series of many bodies that have been created, but an opportunity there. So one of our first recommendations is, there is energy behind creating a national music strategy, and we need to feed into this as a collective. What we're seeing at the moment is that, as I mentioned, there's this siloed working, but we really need this collaboration and to start right at the top with DCMS, DFE, and Skills England, this new body, working together to establish some really clear goals, roles, and responsibilities. And then within the industry or the industries, we need some more meaningful partnerships, and we need some refreshed membership bodies. At these key trade bodies. In particular, we're looking at better representation from the education sector, which isn't currently sitting around the table a lot of the time. So we know that UK Music has been talking about this in their music manifesto, but what we're not seeing necessarily is the grassroots or the third sector organisations, many of which are funded by Youth Music, lots of friends and partners on this call, who are delivering this work day in, day out across the youth sector, across community music, in the third sector, against the odds a lot of the time. We're not seeing necessarily that work represented at the top table. So we want, to be able to acknowledge this conceptual shift that Dan and Kate have developed. We need to keep that front and foremost. We feel like we've got a lot to offer this space, but we also want to be around that table. So Youth Music's exploring how we can mobilize a network of the people here, on this call as a coalition for change here, so that we can better connect our own sector, have more of a collective voice in this space. And so this is just the first start of this, but we're really, really excited about where this could lead to. And we know that there's a lot of conversations happening at the moment that we need to be part of. So I'm going to hand over to Carol, who's going to talk us through our next recommendation.
Yeah, so the second recommendation really is all about reimagining curriculums and careers advice. And I think something important that's kind of coming up through the new government that's relevant to this is that there's going to be a national music education network developed. I don't think anyone exactly knows quite what that's going to look like yet, but basically it's going to be like a landing page into opportunities and kind of supporting children and young people's progression for young people themselves and for kind of teachers and educators that are working with them. So obviously there's a real opportunity there, but really what we want to make sure is that that's kind of showcasing the full breadth of modern day careers. It's not based on this kind of like pipeline trajectory that we've already talked about on this call. So we will be taking the findings of this research specifically to DCMS, Department for Education, and talking to Arts Council around it as well. And actually I've seen we've got a few Arts Council colleagues on the call today, so that's great. And then just feeding into kind of wider national conversations. I think the second part around this is around like the skills that children and young people like actually need to have sustainable careers, and those skills that aren't necessarily being taught on kind of the majority of courses that they might actually attend. So, stuff around marketing and promotion and business development, finance, legal. There's all the whole stuff around like self-care, and then also things around like mentoring and kind of trying to change the culture of the music industries moving forward. So we're just really conscious around what all of these things are. We'll be looking to kind of raise awareness of it, but then also thinking about, well, how do we make sure that they're integrated into our own programs for children and young people? Daniel, are you doing the next one?
Yes, I am. So our third recommendation is to enhance non-formal pathways programs. So we recognise as part of this process that mainstream funding for, what we're broadly calling these pathways programs, for want of a better term, is currently heavily weighted towards formal education, higher education, etc. There are some alternatives to that. We know apprenticeships, but we know that apprenticeship take-up is currently very low. And all of these things are kind of perpetuating these workforce diversity issues. And then there's this relatively smaller amount of investment coming into the third sector, but we also found that that's really heavily weighted towards performer and creative roles at the moment. So again, looking at what the government are talking about here, we know that they're looking to change up the apprenticeship levy to create a more flexible growth and skills levy is what they're calling that. And there's some plans to improve access to finance for small business. We don't know a huge amount about that yet, but what our kind of youth music recommendation is for this is that we'd like them to go even further here. We want to see changes to how young people can access finance. There's quite a stark contrast that graduates can access, almost £30,000 in finance to go to university, but young creative entrepreneurs who aren't going to university can't access finance in a similar way. So, could there be some models to establish ways for young creatives to get their hands on that sort of loan? Looking back at how many creative businesses were set up in the 80s by things like the New Enterprise Allowance, there's a real precedent here. So we think there needs to be greater recognition and more equitable funding for these non-formal pathways programs, things like grants, bursaries, loans, and other development programs, which we're more familiar with. We also really need to recognise the need for long-term mentoring to get people from nest to nest, that idea that Dan and Kate have been speaking about, and into these sustainable careers. It's really, really critical that these key people, these mentors, are supported and funded, because a lot of the time, once you leave that established nest, you might still be talking to a person, but that person, who's supporting them? So I guess what this means for youth music and for the program that we're trying to deliver and design around this, which is still being worked on. But we're obviously funding a lot of pathways provision in England via our Arts Council England grant, which is brilliant. So as we mentioned in our first recommendation, we want to try and mobilise this network of organisations working in this space. So we'll be looking at how we can provide some more resources and some funding for people to kind of participate and attend that. Alongside that, we'll also be looking at increasing youth music funding into organisations in Scotland and Wales, where our existing incubator fund is coming to an end at the moment. We obviously can't spend Arts Council England money in Scotland and Wales, so we want to ensure we're able to continue working with those organisations, which we've been working with for about 3 or 4 years now. And then lastly, but perhaps most interestingly for people on this call, we'll also be expanding our direct funding support for individual young creatives across the UK. So this effectively will build on the work that we've been doing since 2021 on our Next Gen Fund. And you can kind of think of this as almost like a next level. So it will be different for Next Gen Fund in the sense that there'll be larger grants. And instead of focusing solely on 18 to 25-year-olds, they'll be going up to the age of 30 and going beyond supporting DIY performers and really looking at how people can build the skills for sustainable careers and start businesses as well. So it's going back to what Dan and Kate said, it's giving young people that space to experiment, to try out, learn and test. That's what young people told us they want. But also acknowledging that we need that wraparound support, that mentoring, that training, enabling people to have these flight paths, fly for longer, fly safer. And I'm going to hand back to Carol to come onto the concept of safer.
Yeah, so we know that the industry is not necessarily kind of a safe working space, and then that gets exacerbated in particular for young people and for people from kind of more marginalized groups. And obviously the fact that a lot of the workforce is made up of freelancers as well, like, doesn't really sort of help to solve that problem. So The government's going to be coming out with a new deal for working people, and that is going to give greater protection for kind of self-employed workers. But obviously, you know, what's required here is just a massive sort of cultural shift. So a lot of you'll know youth music over the last couple of years, we've been kind of increasing our focus on sort of safeguarding. I think going forwards, what you're going to see from us is kind of more focus on safeguarding, but with particularly for young people entering the music industries. And actually, we're delighted that we're going to be partnering with Music Guardians, who are an organisation set up to do just that. And we've got Katie and Kimberly on the call today with us as well, which is great. You know, the only way that we're going to kind of achieve this is through working in partnership. So we'll also be reaching out to the new kind of industry safeguarding body, the Creative Industries Independent Safeguarding Authority, and our existing partners such as the MU, and obviously looking to all of you as well as in terms of our wider portfolio for how we can really sort of advocate for change in this area. So that is the end of the presentation, but it's not really the end, it's actually just the beginning. It's so fantastic to have so many of you on the call, to have so many of you kind of attended all of those sessions. You know, what that really showed to us was that there's a massive appetite here and to sort of like galvanize, you know, change really for the better for children and young people. So we just are really looking forward to sort of working with you over the coming months and years to kind of really sort of take some of these recommendations, carry on the conversation, but importantly, like put some things into action. And hopefully that's a nice segue into the Q&A, which Michelle's going to lead us through.
Awesome. So thanks very much for listening. I hope you found it all quite interesting. I know that we definitely found some of the findings interesting from some of the young people. So now is a chance for you guys to ask any questions that you might have. You can either add them on the chat and I can ask them, or feel free to kind of put your hand up and shout out. But yeah, now is an opportunity for you to do it. We don't have much time, so we'll have to cut it off after probably about 5 minutes. But yeah, feel free. Please make them short and concise if you can, please, so that we can get through a number of them. So yeah, who wants to start? Who has any questions? I'm sure someone does. Yes, Wiz, go for it.
Hey, Michelle.
Hey.
Really, really great report. Really good to see there was a much more of an acknowledgement of the grassroots organisations who are working in this kind of field. And I think finding more ways to kind of bring them to the table in kind of some sort of conversation, especially youth work organisations who aren't necessarily music organisations, but are very much involved in music as an engagement process. What do you think about might be the ways that they can be supported? One of the things that keeps coming back to me when I speak to a lot of professionals is that there's usually a single person who is heavily involved in their progression in some way, shape, or form. As in someone who took an interest in them, someone who opened the door, someone who followed them through. Are we thinking about ways of finding ways to support those individuals who tend to work in those kind of grassroots organisations?
Anyone want to answer that? Ways of supporting?
I might just come back and just say, I think the first is a great question. Thank you, Wisdom. Is bringing attention to those stories. I don't think the work of the youth services sector, community arts sector, but especially youth services, is in any way appreciated as being so impactful on young people's development. And so, I mean, bringing that to the attention of you know, this wider ecosystem is absolutely number one. And then of course I think greater support, greater investment in supporting people to become mentors, to work in youth services, and that then links with teaching, is I think key to that. But that's on quite a broad level. Go over to Dan or youth music.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think there's a couple of things really, isn't it? It's about making sure that those posts are supported through funding. You know, we're already funding quite a lot, but you know, there's lots of other funders actually working in this space as well. You know, I'm sure Children in Need, for example, are funding lots of those posts too. And so where we're not having direct contact with those people, I think it's about this kind of networking idea as well, and kind of enabling them to be having those kind of joined up conversations, because it kind of speaks to this silo working in this kind of disparate environment that we're in at the moment. And there's nothing there at the moment to really sort of like join up all of those conversations.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Probably got a few minutes left. So if you wanted to pop some in the chat as well, we can sort of maybe try and answer them after the session, but let's have a look. I'm reminded of a new deal for musicians, which was around for a few years, but ended in 2009. Was very well thought of and effective. Thanks, Gail, for that. Anyone else?
There was a question from Paul saying, is there an indicative date for the newly shaped incubator program application first round?
So we will be looking to have a program next year that kind of replaces the Incubator Fund program, but the funding for that is predominantly going to be focused in Wales and Scotland, just to ensure that we've still got that sort of like coverage there. So likelihood that something probably, you know, the programs will be developed and kind of starting hopefully from April next year. So watch this space.
Thanks, Carol. Okay, question. Will the report be available online and when roughly? I know that we're going to be launching it in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, I think we can send it out to this group in the meantime before we've kind of officially launched it, just so you've got it after the meeting. So we'll send that out to you ASAP. But if you wouldn't mind just kind of keeping it amongst yourselves for now, and then the official launch will be coming in a couple of weeks.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay.
I can't raise a hand actually, but I'll do a quick one if nobody else has got any.
Thanks, Danielle.
I think something that was really key was this travel longer and safer from nest to nest, and how to do that. And what I heard is, and I just want to clarify this, what I heard is we can do that through more mentoring. So one thing is about this idea of this kind of mentoring, longer journeys and for longer times, expansion from 25 to 30, etc. And another thing I heard was, and through collaborations within the sector. So there's more links between some of these offers that we're having and they overlay each other. Is there other stuff as well? I hear the stuff about safeguarding, that's also important to sustain young people's journey, but is there other stuff specifically on that, traveling nest to nest, longer and safer? Was there any other kind of things that you recommend for the sector to support that?
I think something that's already been mentioned, thanks for that, Dan, is really building those bridges between the music industries, the education sector, and the work that we're all doing here. I think partnerships, especially on a regional level, become really important for being able to join up working, and so that we're not all so much working in silos. So yes, it's partly about the infrastructure, but it's also about building those connections on a more meaningful level. I don't know what you think, Kate.
Just to add to that, really is I think we do have recommendations about how we might go forward in changing things bit by bit, because collaboration partnership is not easy, especially when we're working in a system that has been the way it has been and supported in a particular way for a very long time. So this is as much about a shift in thinking, and how we go about encouraging other people to see those different perspectives, I think is really, really central. We do have specific recommendations that we're talking to Youth Music about in terms of how we might build that network, but I'd love to talk more.
Thanks, Kate. Just to say a couple of comments that came in through the chat. The Big Music Project, this is from Wiz. Music Potential was a great connection between industry, grassroots, supported by the lottery, but finished in 2018. John Kelly, not a question, but pace and space feels really important in this. I definitely agree.
Michelle, can I just speak to some of the comments that have been said? And
yeah, go for it.
It's really just saying absolutely central to our approach on this research has been learning from what's gone before, learning from what is around us and what is from outside of the music sector. And that is, I think, what has led to this conceptual shift in how we're looking at things. Is there is so much great practice and alternative models of doing in other sectors, whether they're in the creative industries or beyond that. And I just think it's really, really important that as a sector, we acknowledge that and actually start working to learn from other places, as much as sharing good practice and learning how to share good practice within the sector. And that, I think, is really central to our approach, but also our findings.
Yeah, on the back of that, I would say being on the UK Council has given me a really interesting insight into how other sectors are working. Now, Creative UK have kind of realigned in recent years to be more about film and screen and digital and gaming and so on and so forth. And it's really interesting to see how they leverage finance from the industry as an example. And I think we're in an interesting space at the moment where, at least my independent observation is that, you know, you have a lot of brands that are coming into the music education sector and not necessarily co-opting and working with us, who are the experts in the space, because there's stuff around branding and PR and so on, and CSR. And I think there's some really interesting models to learn from other sectors in that regard.
Excellent, brilliant. Well, I think I'm going to have to close it there. We're 2 minutes past 12, but I swear this conversation could probably go on for a lot longer. But I just want to take a moment to thank Dan, Sue, and Kate McBain for presenting such a great presentation on the findings of the consultation, to Carol and Dan for the youth music presence as always and explaining those recommendations, and just to you all for just joining us. It's just been really, really nice to see so many of you, which shows how important this subject is, and hopefully we can find some common ground to all come together and collaborate to help support young people into the music industries. So thanks so much for your time and for joining us here, and have a good rest of your days. Thank you.